It's part of our human condition, right, to be able to get out there and celebrate and to have sorrow. There's all of these life experiences that we have in our hospitality scene. So for me, there's a real optimism on the other side, and I believe in the inner sort of resilience and genius within our industry. And I truly believe that we can have some fantastic trading conditions.
It is a year since Australian restaurants closed in an absolutely, I'm going to use that word, an unprecedented situation when the pandemic really landed on us, and really things are never going to be the same. We are talking today to somebody who knows the hospitality industry inside and out. His name is Ivan Brewer. He's a hospitality profitability expert based in Townsville, Queensland. And I know he is going to share so many interesting insights and practical tips today. Ivan, welcome to Dirty Linen.
That's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you today, Dani.
What a year, hey? I would love you to look back on the year that was and talk about some of the things that you've seen. And, you know, we've heard about this period so many times as an absolute line in the sand. Things have changed a lot. What has changed and what has remained the same?
I've tried to maintain a bit of an upbeat perspective as well, to be honest, because I think we are a very resilient industry. You know, restaurants per se were born due to the French Revolution. You know, that's when we first saw a la carte restaurants and menus come into existence. And we've been around for as long as people have been around in the hospitality industry. So it has been devastating. It has been incredibly difficult, but I do truly believe in the resilience of our industry, because we are a very resilient bunch. Some of the things that I've sort of seen on the more positive note is just this flexibility. And I know that you said unprecedented, and I'm sorry, I have to one up you and I have to say the word pivot. It's the only word that's been used more than unprecedented.
Yep, could be right.
There has been this very rapid change in direction within the hospitality industry, and we haven't always been that way. You know, we are an industry that tends to like to set and forget. That's how we do things and just move forward. So that ability to change direction very rapidly, which has just been absolutely essential, there's been no choice, has been really important, I think, and something that if we can absorb that and have that action to our DNA going forward can actually just help us in the future, where, you know, I think realistically can expect that times will be far less predictable than they have been before.
I mean, how do you sort of balance out that the really strong drive in our community for things to, you know, quote unquote, get back to normal, and this ability to work differently, think differently, act differently that we've all seen? I mean, people do want things to, in so many ways, you know, be like they were. But of course, this also is an amazing opportunity to change. How do you think that all balances out?
I think it's been an interesting sort of looking over the history of the pandemic and how different it has been in different locations. I think being sort of Queensland orientated, but as well as I have some very close associations nationally, there's been very little impact up here. So the want to go back has been almost immediate. There's been very bumpy in Sydney and Melbourne as examples. So the intent to just return to normal has been interrupted over and over again, which makes it just more and more difficult. So I think that unfortunately, there is a strong expectation that a large number of businesses, and through no fault of their own, won't survive on the other side of the pandemic. That is really difficult. And I think the CBD areas in particular are finding it incredibly challenging. I also see in other areas, good operations in other regions expanding rapidly. I've also never seen one site go to 3 or 3 sites go to 5 as rapidly and consistently as I have over the last sort of 6 months as well. So it's this really interesting dynamic that just isn't a one size fits all, is it? It's just so varied. And unfortunately, lots of pain, but also lots of optimism and opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think definitely the impacts of the pandemic haven't been shared equally. There's so much variation in the way that everything's shaken down. We are, we're on the edge of what a lot of people are thinking of as some sort of cliff, a bit of a precipice with the end of JobKeeper. What do you think's in store for the industry?
I'd have to agree. I think there's sort of two sides to it at the moment. And when we know that we have about 10,000 roles that can't be filled within hospitality, and that's just for restaurant managers and chefs advertised on Seek, just an incredibly large number. And it goes to show just how important the overseas, chefs and managers and such and workers have been to our industry for quite a long time. And we need to remember we've expanded very rapidly over the last 10 years. So we've gone from 14 to 42 plus thousand cafes, restaurants and bars in just 10 years, but our total market has hardly increased. So there's much more pressure than there has been in the past. And unfortunately, I think with that, and you could, inverted commas, call it saturation, I think there could be as many as 10,000 businesses that won't be viable by the end of the financial year.
I mean, that is a lot. So what do you think? I mean, we've talked about this staff shortage, but then there's a sort of business oversupply. I mean, do you think it's going to even out?
I think with fewer operations and operators there will be more staff to fill those holes. I do also believe, and it's something for, people that I've been working with and talking to, that if we can just hold on that 12 and 18 months, I think we could be seeing some of the most profitable and some of the most exciting trading conditions in hospitality that we've seen for the last 20 years. So if we can just get through and survive and be fleet of foot, and something that I've seen as a real positive, I've known of inner city cafes and restaurants that have halved their amount of staffing hours within a week, but being able to achieve the same service outcomes, being able to achieve and meet the same revenue. So our efficiency dividend has increased dramatically. And we've not typically been an industry that's very on the front foot at being hyper productive, because we use very broad terms like good service. But what does good service mean? It's not one point. It can be anything within a very long range. So we've become more nuanced in how it is it going to meet what we are promising and looking to deliver in terms of value to our customers. So I think there's two sides to it. One, I think there's going to be a lot of pain, but I really truly believe that we can see some of the best conditions we've seen in a long term on the other side of this.
Why do you have that optimism? What do you think is going to be so good about the future?
Well, if we're looking at 25% less businesses in the industry, we've seen some, it's not across the board, but generally I've seen some incredibly proactive landlords as well that are really sharing the success journey, so that they're seeing that their success comes on the back of the success of their operators, which, as you know, that's not been the case typically. We've still got that overhang of the 2008, boom that we had in the industry before we went into the previous GFC. Well, and we've still been getting that sort of hyperinflated rental costs, which I think is one of the main sort of issues that causes a lack of profitability and hence closures. So something I've always used with operators is that our yearly rent should be less than our monthly revenue, as a rule of thumb, right? So if you can't do that, if you're in double digits with your rent, that's very difficult to be successful. So I think, potential of decreased costs coming into the market, an awful lot more, talent has to be stretched and shared a little bit less competitors that are existing in the marketplace, a huge pent-up demand. I think we all want to get back out to restaurants. We want to be able to share in the beautiful, it's part of our human condition, right, to be able to get out there and celebrate and to have sorrow. There's all of these life experiences that we have in our hospitality scene. So for me, there's a real optimism on the other side, and potentially there could be a little less a rate of entry for businesses as well. If we have a lot of businesses that are failing, a lot of businesses that default on loans and such, it might be a little bit harder to get finance and open up and go in if you're a green skin going into the industry. So for me, I believe in the inner sort of resilience and genius within our industry. I truly believe that we can have some fantastic trading conditions.
So what are some of the other levers that business owners can pull to be profitable and really not just profitable, but more profitable? Because we know that the margins, even if restaurants have been running at a profit, those margins are still incredibly slim. What can people do, specifically, to do better?
So something that we're very much an industry based on scale. So larger businesses are much, much more forgiving, so a larger turnover, sort of 30 grand a week or more, can hide a lot of sins, shall we say. So smaller operators might even be a 10% net profit, which would be very high, but the actual amount of profit is quite small. So for me, there are things that we haven't typically looked at within hospitality. So things like a stock take, Dani. I mean, it's like pulling teeth, right? Like for me to be able to encourage or actually get anybody to actually do a stock take, it's just almost impossible. And these are just essential skills that we have to have. So we need to do stock takes because we can't rely on our point of sale system to tell us what our cost of goods are. Something as well is that we don't measure as part of our cost of goods the value of our inventory. So we tend to have a lot of inventory sitting around. So how frequently should we turn that inventory over? So looking at something in a very different way, it's just money sitting on a shelf. So we really want to be efficient in how it is that we use that money. And then productivity for me. So really much, I'm a big believer that we sell time in hospitality. So if something takes 6 minutes to make, we're selling 10 of those an hour. If we can turn that into 3 minutes, then we're doubling that. So our productivity is this real important perspective, because if we sell more items per hour, our rent's the same and our labour's the same, but we're just having more productivity. So these are things that we don't typically assess or look at. But I think that there's a real interest now in potentially some tech solutions as well. Tech has been huge, I think, within the pandemic. Leading up to COVID, what I've sort of experienced in the food tech scene is we've increased, our food tech's gone from hundreds of dollars a year to thousands of dollars a year in spend, but our profitability hasn't always increased in line with that. So I think being really discerning in what the tech stack is and how much you spend in that space, and really putting a comb through everything, isn't it? And look at, does this serve me? Does this either help me make money or save money?
It's interesting you talk about tech, because a lot of people are talking about that as a solution, a way to reduce staff costs, a way to increase profitability. But do you think that there are some businesses that the kinds of tech solutions we're talking about, like whether it's ordering at the table, for example, to reduce staff, do you think there are some businesses that need to look more closely at that than others?
100%. And one of the great failings we've had within hospitality is we sort of assume everybody's the same. So that one solution would suit then another type of business. And it just doesn't work that way. So two restaurants side by side are profoundly different, from their skill sets and cuisines to menus to the layouts. Everything about that business is different. So, and an example would be, and there'll be a few, and they're very prominent and very recognisable at the moment, some of the tableside ordering. But an example is this constant narrative that we're increasing average check from the tableside ordering. And my question for that is, how are you measuring the number of covers? So we know normal restaurant, you go in, you have a table of 4, the waiter goes back to the point of sale and we'll put in 4 covers. So we'll divide that $100 spend by 4 people. That doesn't work when you've got one table, the customers are ordering for themselves. They'll just look like one transaction because nobody's recording the number of covers. So that can be an example where, one, the elevation in spend per customer might not be completely representative of what's actually happening. And two, certain restaurants will thrive on that, but other restaurants won't. So certainly a properly skilled waiter will always outsell technology. There's just no doubt in my mind for that. So, and a more nuanced sort of experience-based restaurant, that human interface, that co-creation of experience is absolutely profoundly important to that restaurant, less so for QSR. So it's understanding what are we doing in our business and which direction are we facing and how are we achieving our profitability and delivering a great experience, and making sure all of our decisions point in the same direction.
I'm sure there's so many hospitality professionals like fist pumping when you say that the waiter can do a better job than an iPad. How can people, I guess, staff and managers and owners, like how does everyone work together to get the best out of their people?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And for me, we are an industry that thrives in discretionary effort. And it's not something that, if you haven't been part of hospitality or familiar with it, you might not understand what that kind of really means. But how fast you walk back to the point of sale system, how fast you walk from the pass out to the customers, how quickly can you make those drinks? A lot of that comes down to how engaged you are, how pumping the environment is, the fact that everybody's working together. There's this beauty and the synchronicity of just an experienced team where people are almost, mind readers and just assuming what that next person's going to need, and a bar person can pick it all up. It's like a symphony, it's just beautiful to watch. So I think there always needs to be someone within the team that's keeping an eye on bottlenecks. And that can be as simple as a bottle bin. A bottle bin behind a bar is too small, gets filled up too quickly, and then it's a massive, either one of the staff have got to run it out, and then all of a sudden you've got one person away for 5 minure, or the ice bowl being too small. They can have massive impacts on this flow, where you just want to have your main servers. So the staff that are dealing directly with the customers, they're your revenue generators. You just want to get every bottleneck out of their way and just let them go, let them run.
That's so interesting, those little specifics. I mean, I think people are so often in the thick of their businesses, and of course, it's been so hard to get back up and going, especially somewhere, like Victoria, where we've just had a lot of shutdown. Do you think, what do people do to notice this? Is it simply a matter of just standing back and watching, or is it about having more meetings? Empowering people to make these changes themselves? Like, what kinds of things do you see happen in businesses that really work?
Probably put that into two perspectives. So one, of my career has largely been focused on turning around businesses. It's just been something that sort of landed on my plate. And almost every single time, the answers are always there on the floor. So your staff are the ones, if you can just ask the right questions, they've got the answers. They're the ones that are dealing with it. They're the ones that know all the answers. They unfortunately have either made suggestions and they've been ignored, or they just don't feel empowered to make the suggestions. And the second instance, similar to that, is when you have new staff coming in, or you've coming in back from a break, there are these fresh eyes, because you're exactly right. When you come into a new business and you've been there for a month, you just become inured to it. You just don't really notice the things that are a bit of an inconvenience. But those new staff that come in can have, and we tend to, they're annoying, they've got all these suggestions, but those suggestions are absolute gold. That's incredibly important. And a really, an interesting example that I use is if we look at the latte art craze that's sort of gone around. And I'm an old school barista. I was trained to make coffee in Italy, in Trieste, back in the 90s. We didn't even call us baristas until the 2000s, recognised and fair work. But for me, do we charge more? So as a restaurant or a cafe, do I charge more for putting on latte art? It's generally no, but it takes me longer. So it's actually increased my cost to deliver that coffee to the customer, because I'm now doing half as many coffees as I was before. So just thinking about, what are we trying to achieve? Are we earning more money and more profit as a result of that? And how can we achieve the same thing doing it a different way?
But you're not saying that someone should put a premium on doing a bit of latte art, are you?
No, but at the end of the day, if it increased my cost, so if it takes me an extra 2 minutes and all of a sudden I'm only making 30 instead of 45 coffees, and you've noticed, or what I've sort of really noticed as a narrative, is all of a sudden we're starting to talk about how all the prices are too cheap, right? That the baristas now cost us more. They're now the superstars that are costing, I know some places in Melbourne that are $70,000 a year plus for a barista. So they charge more. We're making fewer transactions per hour, so we're earning less money, and we can't charge more. So for me, it's from a profitability paradigm, it doesn't really make sense.
I suppose, if it means that, 25% more people are Instagramming their coffees, and you do get a marketing drive out of that, then perhaps you could justify it. But I see what you're saying. It's like you've got to work out if it stacks up.
That's right. And we are there's some really interesting fluctuations in the way in which transactions behave. So, we're often, especially for restaurants and some cafes, a 2-day-a-week operation. So even from my experience in seeing some 1,000-odd businesses, 50% of our revenue can happen in as little as 12 to 15 hours of the week, which is just extraordinary. So those 2 days, Friday and Saturday, 50% of our revenue happening in just 5 or 6 hours in each of those 2 days. So we can't do any more in those times. And that's, part of where I've had a real concern around delivery. So if I can only do 300 meals an hour on a Friday night, but all of a sudden I've got 100 of those coming in as delivery and they got a commission of 30%, I've actually lost money. So, because I can't increase my productivity capacity. But if that gave me a bump on my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then happy days. But of course, as a community, we tend to go to those peak times. It's very hard to move people from that sort of normal condition Friday, Saturday night. Then we have QSR cafes. They tend to have a much flatter sort of across the week revenue, but they'll have that 11 to 1, or that 7 to 8 sort of peak time. So the influences as such can have an impact, but they really need to drive custom to our non-peak times because we can't do any extra anyway.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, it's such a struggle finding staff. And I was part of a Twitter conversation over the weekend. Someone who went to a regional area was disappointed that, she was going to visit a pub on I think it was the Sunday night. They ended up closing because they didn't have staff. Presumably they just couldn't open and be profitable. And so they didn't open. But then there's this sort of goodwill aspect to it. There's this idea that we're supposed to be traveling to the regions and spending money. I mean, but then of course restaurants are not a community service. I mean, there's just so much to balance out, isn't there?
And we don't tend to recognise that hospitality has been shown to be, and is in my opinion, the most complicated industry to work in. It's the most complicated business type to be profitable in because we have very fluctuating revenues but relatively fixed costs. And even when we go to a chef, and I see this all the time, how do chefs succeed? They're not given cost of goods targets when they write a menu. They're not given productivity targets. They'll just go make a menu. And it's almost impossible to achieve the right menu within the context for that business because there's no parameters that have been placed around that. So it's a very, very challenging industry to do. And even before the pandemic, I think the reality was with our, so few, I think we've had something like 1/7 of the amount of apprentices coming through than we did even 10 years ago, a fraction of the apprentices. We've all been struggling to hire skilled staff. So that's been something to be aware of, and the fact that we're possibly moving more towards cooks and away from chefs, just as something that we've had to do moving forward. But it is, it's not a community service, 100%. The demands of customers are very high. But to me, we as an industry have a really good opportunity now to reevaluate how it is that we structure our business. And that comes down to decisions we make before we open the doors, things like rent, and then the decisions that we make when we actually open the doors and how it is that we can be profitable.
So what kinds of guidance, let's say on a chef who's creating a menu, would be helpful?
So for me, a menu is a big thing, so a menu is the strategic vehicle for that business. So it's not something that we can just do. There needs to be a great deal of work and a great deal of cooperation with the management, including the chef, as to what those outcomes need to look like. So how are we going to position this? What are we doing as a business? So where is our positioning? What's our strategic imperative? And that's a big question to answer just off the start. And then to narrow down from that, because where do we sit? Do we sit in the fast casual mode? Do we more towards the QSR, etc.? How are we going to serve that food? So what is the front of house going to look like? And then that really looks at a residual labour cost that we're then going to have within the kitchen. So on a peak Friday night, if you're only going to have four chefs in the restaurant, what does the menu need to look like for it to only be those 4 chefs? So to me, I look down, well, okay, if we need to be profitable, we know what our rent is, we know now what our revenue needs to be. If we've got 50% of our revenue in 12 to 15 hours, we need to do 300 meals an hour in our peak times. Can this kitchen produce that?
Are there any menu, like red flags when you look at a menu, when you come in to help a business? Are there any things that stand out to you like, whoa, this looks like trouble?
Long, big menus would be, and ones that aren't being changed frequently enough. So I think often I think is an opportunity within COVID, and something that I've really pushed for in the short to medium term has been dramatically reducing the size of our menus. And thankfully, and I believe due to a push from RCA, Restaurant and Catering, it was just so fantastic to see the delivery options allow the restaurants to have a different menu for the delivery compared to the menu in-house, which has been incredibly important, and then hence different price points to try to cover some of those. So, same menu in both delivery and in-house. Open up to 1,000 different delivery options is probably a bit of a concern for me as well. And definitely size. We want to be looking at most sort of typically you're looking at 6 or 7 entrees, no more than 10 mains and 6 and 7 desserts. And understanding what you are. If your restaurant isn't calling away entrees and then calling the mains, then you're just selling mains and sides. You're not selling entrees and mains. Because if the food's just going to come on out when it comes out, so understanding what your service style is and what you're trying to achieve, and then what the menu needs to look like.
And what about when you walk into a business? You've talked about the too small bottle bin and the too small ice bucket. What other kind of red flags do you say from a front of house perspective?
Yeah, for me, it just comes down to they need to explain to me what I need to understand. How are we making money? So what type of business are you? And a good question for me is what's your labour cost and your cost of goods? Now, if a restaurant's going to answer to me that's 30% labour, 30% cost of goods, I can guarantee they're not being as profitable as they can be, because I've heard that same sort of measure, the KPI measure, in London. I've heard it in America. I've heard it in New Zealand and across Australia. Now, there's no possibility that globally we can be sharing the same KPI targets. So what is the right KPI target for that business depends on the cost structure of that business. So typically for me, I actually get right into the back end. I want to really understand what's happening from the finance perspective and what is the opportunity for profit, and then look at how that's overlaid and truly understand, what type of business are you? I had one business where we actually decreased their labour from 32 to 25%, but actually increased their weekly revenue by $15,000 per week, which wouldn't make sense, right? You think you've got less labour, you'd make less money. But just because we reorientated what they were doing, and that was just QSR, it was order at the counter, and it was based on speed. Low prices, high cost of goods, which meant that the labour needed to be low and based on high table turnovers. So there's these particular ingredients that we need to see. How long are they going to sit at the table? If we're more fine dining, so less table turnovers, it's going to mean a higher average check. So how much beverage are we selling in that instance? So where in the service paradigm do we sit? And then what are the unique aspects of that part of the paradigm that you're exploiting, or the opportunities that you're missing?
Ivan, you obviously really know your stuff, and you mentioned that you trained in Italy on the coffee machine. Can you give us a bit of a backstory and tell us how you came to be doing what you're doing?
Sure, yeah. So I fell into hospitality. So I was, ironically as well, I sort of talked my way into working in a award-winning cafe in Auckland to start off with. And I'm from North Queensland, right? So we didn't deliberately drink hot drinks. There was no espresso when I was, so I just I had no idea what I was doing. But very, very, one of the smartest businesses I've ever seen. So it was a gentleman, it was set up by a guy named Craig Miller, and he was really the grandfather and father of New Zealand coffee. And to me, New Zealand coffee has consistently been about 5 years ahead of Australian coffee, including Melbourne. So
whoa, fine words.
I know, those big words, I know. And he designed this cafe. It was so slick. I would have 3 grinders. The reason I had 3 grinders is the grinders would work so much that the blades would expand and overheat and lock up. Then I'd need to move to the next grinder.
Wow.
So I was doing 1,500 coffees a day as a barista.
Whoa.
Just between 7 and 2. So just rapid, right? Just extreme productivity. And from that sort of and I absolutely loved it. I loved the human interaction. I loved the productivity. I've always been attracted to the mental side of it, because it's a real puzzle to me, to look at this chaos and how we can make sense of it and restructure it in a way that can be more profitable. On the back of that was, fortunate to do well in a barista contest. I had an opportunity to spend 3 months in Trieste making coffee, which was phenomenal, on an 8-group machine, just making ridiculous amounts with 2 baristas, and each of the groups had 3 pourers on it. So you're making 3 croffies at a time. Just, scale. That's absolutely crazy. I was then offered an opportunity to work at the Regent, which we were just nearby. So I was exposed then to, Michael James that I worked with. He opened up Wildfire down in Sydney, working with Conchi Ferrick, incredibly high level. I was, lucky to wait on the Queen when she was there. We did Chogham. So I was then exposed to the super high end 7-star restaurant and the hotel, and then went out into the restaurant called Essence, which Michael James went to open in New Zealand. So I worked out in that then as well. So that became the best restaurant in the country. And I've just had this huge thirst to learn. And so as soon as I was able to master one environment, I'd move over to the next. And that brought me back to Australia, and have more or less done the same here. Just progressed up through the stages and just tried to make sense of as many different segments as possible.
And what's made you now focus on the business side of things? Why aren't you actually working in the industry anymore? I broke my neck 4 years ago. So that unfortunately means that I can no longer work in my beloved industry. I have a permanent spinal cord injury and 6 screws that hold my neck together. So that, I can't even look down and see my feet. Wow.
You're not suited to hospitality, which has been, that's been quite difficult because it is just what I absolutely adore. So what I've really, what's helped me through that as experience is just to try to reorientate. And then I've had so many experts and so many wonderfully knowledgeable people share their knowledge with me, and I've just wanted to do the same. I've just wanted to give back, and that's part of why I'm now pursuing Peso, my own software startup. It's literally about now how can I help businesses be profitable, and dealing with them one-on-one from a consulting perspective just isn't achieving the impact that I'd wanted to achieve. So software is the best way that I know to be able to expand that influence as quickly as possible. So
what is Peso?
So Peso is a profit-first software. It's a software that hasn't been seen before in hospitality. So what Peso does is it makes sense of the business operation for the venue owner or operator, and then it guides the user on what to do. So Peso will actually tell the venue how much money they've got to spend on purchasing and how much money they've got to spend on their labour on a weekly basis.
Sounds like witchcraft, but useful witchcraft.
100%. And the thing for me, and I've been held accountable to these things myself. So I needed this technology when I was operating businesses, because I was standing in the middle of a busy restaurant trying to think, well, how can I either make money or save money? I'm going to get P&L 6 weeks from now. I have no means of measuring my productivity or know what's going on. And I just desperately needed that myself as an operator. So Peso is real time. It produces weekly P&Ls. It's a profit first software. So the venue actually puts in either a percentage of revenue or a dollar amount that they want to earn right at the get-go. And then we can construct it. It creates those guidelines for the business to construct its operation to be successful.
Yeah, right. That sounds good. I think so few businesses of any sort put profit as the first objective, isn't it? It's always the thing that hopefully is left over at the end.
It is. I've known myself and even quite large businesses that I've been involved in and run that you try to get that 15 or 16% profitability by the end of the calendar year, and you're holding your breath to see where you're going to land by the end of the financial year. And that's no way. Even when, as I mentioned, in terms of, what are your cost of goods targets? What should they be? There's a huge number of rostering platforms that are available in the world, but none of them will tell you what is the right amount of labor to spend on your roster. So we all just kind of make it up, and then if we know we have an amount, because even for me, service has to exist within a business context. There's no good for us to, and I've seen a lot of this over the last 5 years, businesses with fantastic food, great service and great, even seeming quite busy, but they're not making any money. We have to make money. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, well, I guess it sounds like you're sort of reverse engineering, but actually the reverse engineering should be the template, should be the standard.
And we're an industry driven by passion, and a love of people. It's not, we don't typically have that boring fascination with numbers and success. I love the industry. I love the people in it, and I just want to be able to support them and serve them as best I possibly can.
And Ivan, you mentioned you broke your neck. Those are very dramatic and alarming words. What happened?
Well, I had a very rare bone disease. So the ligaments inside of my neck were turning to bone without my permission, without my knowledge. So I was operating with a severe spinal cord injury and not knowing it. So I was rushed into surgery with less than a millimetre of spinal cord. So I was a trip and a fall away from dropping dead from a severed spinal cord. So the outcome is the same. My experience in a day-to-day life is exactly the same as if I'd broken my neck. It's just much easier to say broke neck than it is to say I had a very, very, very rare disease.
Wow, you just don't know what's around the corner. Hey, but what's your sort of daily life like now? How mobile are you?
I've been very fortunate. Had a great deal of support, especially from my family, and I'm a very motivated person. So it was certainly a lot of dark times. It was very hard to go from a place where I was very active and very fit to being dropped into this disabled, body and vessel. I wasn't expected to be able to walk, but I can, and I'm far beyond where I was expected in terms of rehab. So my main problem now is I live in a very high level of pain. So I live in a migraines level of pain all day, every day.
Wow.
But I'm just, for me, I'm driven by my family and I'm driven by a need to contribute to my industry. And that pursuit of peso over those last sort of nearly 4 years has been an absolute lifesaver, quite literally, because it's given me something to do, and helping people and talking to people in the industry allows me to not just dwell in pain, really. So more than half my day would be flat on my back. That it's amazing now, due to technology, what we can do through our phones and through our laptops, which is just wonderful.
Well, it's incredible that you're such a productive person, but also helping so many businesses around the country to be more productive. It's like you've got a disability, but you're amplifying everything that's possible in so many different ways. It's really inspiring.
I appreciate that. Look, so I'm determined to make, and it sounds silly, but I'm determined to make what's happened to be the best thing that's ever happened to me. So I want to achieve more, probably, and have the focus to be able to do so than I would have without that. So Peso is now hopefully just a month, 6 weeks away from market ready and from launch. And LinkedIn, where I met yourself, Dani, and being able to be part of the hospitality community is just an absolute pleasure. So to now being the time where we really need the help the most, I just want to be able to help people the best way I can.
Wow, really beautiful. So Ivan, it's a year since Australia shut down. For me personally, I'm really feeling this anniversary. I'm getting, those reminders that you get on social media about what was happening a year ago, and I'm feeling quite emotional. What can you say to people who are, in this moment, living this moment, but of course in the thick of their businesses, trying to reclaim lost ground and power on? Give us some fighting words.
I think support is really important. A close friend of mine took his life last week, and I think people just don't reach out, right? I think just supporting each other is just incredibly important, because I know quite a few hospitality people that all of the weight's just gone onto them. They're just working incredible hours and incredibly hard. So I think for as a community, that we need to be able to look after each other and keep an eye out for each other, I think, which is really important. And that we will get there, just to simplify life. Your customers love you. The customers want you to be able to succeed and want you to be able to be there. So nothing has to be perfect. Let's just take a snapshot of what we're trying to achieve. Don't try to do all of it. Just reduce down what you're doing so it's something that can be delivered on, and keep it simple. And we will get there. We will get through this, and there will be a huge opportunity on the other side of it.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Really appreciate all your wisdom and, all the experience you've been able to bring to this conversation, both professionally and personally. It's been really a pleasure to speak to you. And I know that the things that you've said are going to mean a lot to a lot of people. I would just like to say that anyone who's feeling like they do need to reach out for extra support, your GP is always a great place to start with, but Lifeline Australia is always there on 131114. Thank you for guiding us through this anniversary of lockdown, Ivan, and really wish you all the best with Payzo. We'll keep an eye on it.
Absolute pleasure. It's been a delight to talk with you.
Okay, thanks so much. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.